Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome David Franklin to Jannie Broadcast. How are you, David?
I'm doing well today. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to this.
Do you know what? It's fantastic to be able to connect with you. And I thought before we talk about the man behind the music, I'd like to talk about your new album. Because your new album, One Day in Spring, is just that, isn't it? It is available on all music outlets, Apple Music, Spotify, Bandcamp, and all the usual downloading sites, isn't it? But I want you to talk me through the album and how you came about, because what I found was fascinating was it's all about a typical day, and it's about nature and waking up and hearing the birds and finding the dawn breaking. It's just a beautiful concept. Can you
Yeah,
talk me through that? How you came
absolutely.
about?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I should start with this. It was accidental. I didn't know I recorded an album until a few weeks later. What had been going on is I was having trouble with my recording equipment for a couple months, and I felt like I had something to say, and I didn't know what it was yet. And finally, I just gave up on tech support and got a new computer and tried it one day at my computer and just left the microphone set up. I have a grand piano, and I left the microphone set up, and I was like, okay, I got my system working. And then I woke up the next morning, and it was a spring morning this past spring, and I realized nobody was home. Um, the people I live with were all gone, and it was just before dawn, and I felt like, well, maybe I'll just hit record and see what happens.
Yeah,
So I got out of bed. I did open the windows, and so I could hear the rain. It was raining, and I just improv created a piece that was kind of very much in my dream state of just not yet thinking, or my brain wasn't quite online yet, and something came out, and I was like, wow, that felt okay. Let me do it again. And at that point, the sun wasn't quite up. It was called, that time of day is called the gloaming, where there's light from the sunrise, but the sun hasn't yet officially risen. Um, and then I was kind of playing to the sounds of the birds that were starting to chirp or sing, and into the morning, and to the way I was kind of feeling my way through this experience.
mhm,
Um, and then in the next songs, like, the light was now coming in more, and I was waking up a little bit more. And this is how the first 7 songs of the 10 came to be. I literally played them in the order of the album, in the way that they are heard on the album, in the time that it takes to hear them.
mm.
So I recorded 7 of them. I tried to do an eighth, and I kind of stumbled because I needed some caffeine. So I got up, I made tea, and then I was like, I did that. And now I was getting more into my thinking brain,
Yeah,
because I'm getting more caffeinated. And then I was like, what if I took some of the ideas I've been working on, or just kind of working with, and gave myself 1 or 2 or 3 times to just play them in the spirit of what I just did, these
mm,
other things. And
mm.
so the last 3 pieces came out that way. And so there's 10 pieces on them on this album, and that's how it happened. And then I didn't even listen to it, because to me the music was too simple and too sparse, and I guess I had some judgment about that, of like it was too easy and
Yeah,
simplistic. And but a couple weeks later I played it for some friends, and my friends were like, just release it, like this,
yeah.
there's something here. And so in a way, what I like is that I bypassed my normal kind of ways of thinking about things and just kind of felt my way through it.
Amazing, amazing. I just love the concept of it because, it's about like different parts of nature and that sort of, dawn morning. And it's just an amazing concept. And of course, this album was created in just one day. It was quite spontaneous, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
And it was just it's just an incredible album. And I mean, I was really impressed when I heard it. And of course, you once said that it's the most vulnerable album that you've ever created. And of course, this is it the 11th album?
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
11th one. Yeah,
And,
yeah.
you
It
know,
started
it's the
as,
most vulnerable album. So why did you say that?
in large part because I'm a little ashamed to admit this, but I think in some ways I've kind of curated, like, I've written music and then I've
Mm.
recorded what I've written.
Yeah.
And of course, each time I would play a piece, because I play guitar as well, like each time I would play a piece, I would play it differently or feel my
Mm.
way through it differently. But I'm following a map, a road map of sorts. And this time I had no roadmap. I
Mm.
was just kind of walking through the forest of music in some ways and just figuring out, oh, where's my next step? Where's my
Yeah.
next landing point? And so, I had a friend tell me more recently that when you're praying in the right way, you don't know if you're giving or you're receiving.
Mm.
And I thought, love can be like that. When you're loving in some way, it's hard to know if you're giving or receiving.
Mm.
And creativity is that for me too. And maybe they're
Mm.
all the same energy ultimately. But creativity, when I am in the zone, I don't know if I'm receiving or giving, but I'm in some sort of magical moment. Some might call it a flow state. I don't know. But in that state, it's like I'm lucky enough that I know these instruments enough to be able to try to translate what I'm feeling or what I'm experiencing into some sort
Mm.
of sonic space. But I've never played the way that I played on this album. Like I don't know that I've ever played that sparsely, particularly for the first like 5 or so tracks.
Mm. I
So
mean, music is incredible, isn't it? And I think you share the same values as me. I mean, music is very, very healing. It just makes you feel so much better, doesn't it? And and one piece of music can take you back to a memory. I just think it's so powerful. Music is so powerful, and to put so much thought into an album, you're really putting your heart and soul into it, aren't you? And this album, you can really see that, and you can hear it in the album. You've really sort of put your heart and soul into this album, and it's incredible. I just love it. I've been listening to it actually today, and it's just so lovely. And I'm sure all the listeners and people who are watching this will feel exactly the same, because it's just gorgeous. Now, I know that the healing side is very important to you, isn't it?
it is. I mean, what you just said about music to me, and I'll speak about the healing piece, but to me, music transcends time and space.
Yes,
It can
yeah,
bring us way, like, I'll speak for me, it can bring me to a moment when I was 5 and I heard a certain song, or it
exactly.
can bring me back to a place where I was, or to the moment of, you know, falling in love or meeting somebody
Mm.
or meeting a friend for the first time. It transcends so much of what I think it was like, kind of like typical mind.
Yeah, yeah, it does.
And
It does.
and that's how I think about what healing is. So
Mm.
I'm also a psychotherapist, and that's what I do. That's where I make the bulk of my money. That's how I support myself, is as a psychotherapist. Um, and to me, what healing often requires of people to really grow and transcend some sort of pain or challenge or something going on is to transcend a previous way of understanding or thinking or even feeling about things
Mm.
so that one can grow.
Yeah,
And it doesn't mean obliterating or getting rid of a previous form of self. It means, um, understanding new ways of being, of holding hard truths, perhaps.
yeah.
And I believe music really speaks to that, really
Mm.
can create a lot of the conditions for that.
Yeah, I'm really impressed as well that in your regular job. You help people as well. You know, you've already mentioned you're a therapist, and you specialize it in families and relationships. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But what really impressed me is that you're putting something back to the musicians as well, because part of your therapy is working with musicians, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's very sort of it's very holistic what you do. I think it is incredible. I mean, how do you put that into your day job then when you're working with musicians? How do you help them?
You know, I think a lot of musicians are essentially highly sensitive people
Yeah.
who, the really good news is that they've learned some way to take what they're feeling, or to, you know, feel out loud, or to translate what's happening internally and to express it.
Mm.
Um, that's one of the beautiful things about being a highly sensitive person. One of the challenges about being a highly sensitive person is that the world is not always so kind and so or beautiful, and so people confront challenges or confront other things, and when people are highly sensitive they can feel those things in a more challenging way.
Yeah.
So that's not the only reason why I might work with musicians in my practice, um, but like I've worked with touring musicians, for instance, who, you know, have felt like, you know, I'm in this industry called being a musician or whatever it
Mm.
is, and I've lost the spirit of music. And for me, I think a big piece of this is reminding people about, like, to me, there's the spirit of music, and
Mm.
then there's an industry, maybe called the music industry. And to me, it's about reminding people of their spirit and their connection to the spirit of music. And when those things are in sync, then they have that portal open to be able to kind of channel and express and feel out loud. And then they get to make a choice. Do you still want to engage with the industry or not?
Yeah.
Or do you need a break from that piece or not?
Mm. Mm.
But, you know, I believe that the spirit of music is alive and well, but the ways that music is treated by humans in our society, or in different societies, is not always treated with care and respect. It's often treated as a transactional thing, and I think that
Yeah.
really kind of muddies things, and it hurts people's spirits sometimes as well.
Mm. Because it's quite hard, isn't it, the music industry? It can be quite cruel at times, you know, when artists have worked so hard and put the heart and soul into an album or a piece of music. Um, you know, and it can be quite difficult. And I suppose really it can be quite heart-rending at times, because when you put your heart and soul into something, you know, if for any reason you don't get the response that you want, I suppose, you know, it's good to have something there where somebody can help them and talk them through it, you know, which is obviously what you do, which is absolutely incredible. So you're putting something back into the industry, a more holistic approach, you know, than just saying, oh, just go and see a therapist, just go and see the doctor or see a therapist. You know, it's a more holistic approach, which is fantastic. Now, of course, you have experimented with lots of different genres, haven't you, over your time? And you have obviously you have 10 albums under this particular one. What ways are those previous albums different to this one? Are they different genres, or do you sort of have you found your genre now where you feel quite safe and you like it better, you know,
Yeah,
prefer
you
it?
know, yeah, thanks for asking. You know, I started out as a singer-songwriter,
Mm.
um, and um, and did a lot of that for a while. I was in rock and roll bands for a while, and you know, oddly, like after, you know, I have two adult sons, they're both musicians as well, but after they were born, I felt like writing music with words didn't speak to me as much. And I just started writing lots of instrumental things. And so, like in the 80s and 90s, I was writing music with words. And then, kind of at the
Yeah.
turn of the century, I'm mostly writing music, which is instrumental. I feel like I can say more when the constructs of speech, of human speech, at least as I
Mm.
can convey it, are taken out of the equation.
Do you feel like it's more an expression of your self, of your soul?
Yes.
Yeah,
And more of an expression also of the subtlety that I feel that I want to have come forward somehow.
yeah,
I'm not claiming to always do that well, but it does feel like I have less is more for me in that. Like I have more of a palette to do that. Um, and again, guitar is an instrument also that I play a lot. I never knew I would do a solo piano album, and yet it like so that's part of what I do as well through these things is I really listen to myself and what needs to come forward.
mm,
I've done electronic music, I've done like, other music with found sounds and so there's sound just calls to me, but I
yeah,
also, again, as corny as it may, or as corny as I might feel saying this, I do try to listen to my heart on this. I mean, to me, that's the beauty of not supporting myself as a musician at this point in my life,
yeah.
is that is the currency that I am receiving, is to meet whatever the voice is that needs to express and to share that hopefully with people who can
Mm,
receive it.
amazing. So, on a personal level, you're a family man, and you have done lots of things. You studied at UC in Berkeley. Um, Talk me through your early life then, with in terms of growing up. Did you grow up with music in your life? Did you
I
have any
didn't.
influences?
Well, I mean, music always spoke to me deeply as a really little boy. And I grew up in a really blue collar area of New Jersey, and um, there didn't seem to be a lot of place where like a really sensitive
Mm,
boy can, be. And so like, I figured out, how to play football and baseball and all that stuff. But I also, I also just started playing drums when I was about 9 years old, and then taught myself guitar starting 11 or 12, taught myself
oh.
piano like
So it was all
14.
self-taught then, was it?
It's all self-taught, yeah.
Wow, it's
And
amazing.
and there's some bad aspects of that. There's some kind of basic things that lots of musicians know that I don't know. But on the flip side, because I felt my way through it, I didn't always run it through brain.
Mm,
So I got to have more of a channel to like, I'm at the point now where I feel like I could really feel out loud. I could
mm,
just sit in improv and try to translate things into sound. I write music for modern dance companies sometimes,
mm.
and that music can be very different than what I've done on this album. But I, I just love the idea of taking sound to translate the human experience.
Amazing. Amazing. So obviously, you have done lots of things, and when you were growing up, what was your first experience then with music? I mean, you've already touched that you played with various rock bands and stuff like that. And when was your first time when you performed for the first time?
Yeah, I was 17 and I was in college, and I was the drummer in a rock band, and um, I was so nervous that my legs were shaking, so I had to use my whole leg to hit the kick drum because my leg
Yeah.
like um. But what I realized really quickly was, as the drummer, how I played, how I approached the song, like people were dancing, and that if I made some subtle changes, people would move differently,
Yeah. Yeah.
dance differently. And I really, after getting more comfortable with performing, I really started experimenting with, if I do like 16th notes on the hi-hat, people will maybe do this thing. And then I got to this place of, okay, what can I do to get people moving in their upper body?
Yeah.
And like, I don't mean this in a way that is negative, but it felt kind of like, how do I kind of be a puppet master here? People maybe move or dance a certain way. And it was wild to then realize that connection with sound and music and people, how they felt and how they moved. Um, and then as I got older and less, playing drums less, more focusing on guitar and piano, I realized that it's not only rhythm, it's also expression. It's also,
Feeling, yeah.
yeah, things like, feeling that can come out and make people move. And
Mm.
to me, the deepest musics are musics that can make people laugh or
Mm.
cry.
Yeah.
And the tears don't necessarily have to be about sadness,
Mm.
but they can be about connection or release or permission to simply be.
Mm.
Because that to me is like music even touching people's bodies with, you know, bypassing brain perhaps.
Mm. Amazing. So do you feel that you found yourself now where music is concerned? Do you feel as if you're at where you want to be?
You know, to me, one of the wonderful things about having music as a traveling companion in my life is that this is where I am now. This is what I did. I never knew I would do it. I don't know that I'll do it again. I mean, I'm working more in like electronic kind of music right now.
Mm.
And although electric instruments don't always speak to me as much as acoustic instruments, I just purchased an instrument that's a couple hundred years old. It's called a grand harmonicon,
Oh,
which it's from the mid 1700s, and it's wine glasses that you fill with water at different heights, and you kind of spin them. It's
yeah.
it's like
Amazing.
yeah. So like, there's all these things that call to me that I would love to do deep dives on. I'm experimenting with prepared piano. I've experimented with that over the years. I can imagine doing a prepared piano album, but now I'm also thinking maybe I do a guitar album that's also solo guitar that is,
Mm.
maybe one day in winter or something, just to kind of take the theme and, what would it be like, to to really lean into guitar in this way. So
Mm.
yeah, I don't know that I'll ever come to one place and have that be the place. Um,
So
yeah,
do you think you'll sort of experiment with your music um and go through the seasons of the year? Because
I
you started with the spring and of course with the instruments that you play on that, and then of course you you telling me that you play different instruments and you want to develop sort of electronically and all kinds of different things. So do you feel that you could do a different sort of feel for a different season?
yes,
It's a great concept, that, isn't it, really?
yeah, and the other spring calls to me, and autumn really calls to me. I live in California. I often go back to the East Coast in autumn to see the leaves change color.
Mm.
And I could absolutely imagine doing that in autumn because the
Mm.
transitions, to me, the transitions are where I kind of, not that I fall asleep, but I kind of wake up in a way of like,
Yeah,
oh, things are changing. What
yeah.
needs to change within me? How do I embrace that rather than run from it? Or if I need to be fearful of it, how do I hold that fear? You know? Yeah.
Amazing. So, during your career, you must have had some highs and lows in terms of music. Um, what's been the highs for you?
I love when I get an email from somebody I don't know who just says thank you, that something that I've written or recorded has touched them.
Mm.
That's actually one of the biggest highs for me because it again, that's that transcendence of time or space, or
Yeah.
knowing somebody. It's like that. I, I think it's really amazing that I could feel something and move my body in certain ways on an instrument,
Mm.
record that sound, and then that sound travels somehow. Somebody hears it, and then they hear it, and it speaks to them and moves something within them, so that then they complete the circle and reach back to me. That just feels really lovely.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of your career, then, I mean, what have you been your highlights? I mean, Um, do you have any performances that are really memorable to you, or have you got anything coming up in the future that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, well, so some of the highlights, thank you for that. Some of the highlights, a musician that I've played with a number of times that has recorded with me on a couple of albums is Michael Manring. And he's a bass player that literally has played with my favorite musicians of all time. He played with Michael Hedges, who was my favorite musician of all time. He also recorded with John Gorka, who I really enjoy. And so, like, being able to spend time with Michael Manring and be with somebody who's, I don't know, who's to play music with somebody who has shaped me and then bring
Mm.
that full circle also, that's been really memorable.
Yeah, amazing.
Also at the last show that he and I had done together, my son, who's now 25, he's a fabulous musician, and he played some songs with us as well.
Mm.
And so that was just really full circle. um, yeah, you know, this, I don't know if this sounds kind of dark, but one of the things also that really touched me musically was my mom passed away about 4 years ago.
Oh,
But
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, thank you. But it was during the, you know, lockdown time of COVID, and it was before vaccines were available. But I still went to be with her for, you know, like the last week of her life, and it was just she and I alone.
Mm.
And um, and I just played music for her. She was not conscious, but I had a guitar with me, and I just kind of improvised to her space. And, you know, I would match her breathing, and when her breathing would shift, I would shift. And I felt like it was kind of a final, I don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
melody out of sorts, perhaps, but like, you
No.
know, it felt like a communication. I mean, people say that the last thing to go for beings who are dying is the hearing. And so I suspect in some ways I was, you know, reaching across some barrier through her consciousness to her consciousness. So that was actually a high point, because to me, again, that's that transcendence of time and space with music.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a beautiful thing that you've done for your mum, you know, at the end of her life. And I believe obviously that you do go on. I do believe that, and she would take that with her. You know, that's a beautiful thing that you've done. But when I've been reading about you, David, I've been amazed really at some of the things that you've done. And I know recently there was a time in your life when you walked across the entire breadth of the US. Now, that's absolutely incredible. What inspired you to do that? I mean, what was
So
it that made you do it?
yeah, so that was in 1990. And when I finished college, so I went to college for environmental science because I was always concerned about climate change. And then I worked in that field for a couple of years
Mm.
and realized that people were not interested in knowing much about it in the late 80s. And then I heard about a group about to walk across the country to bring awareness to climate issues.
Mm.
And I joined them. And it was a 9-month walk, Los Angeles to New York City. And we spoke at colleges, we spoke at schools. When we were in Washington, D.C., we spoke to congressmen about these things. People were still not really ready to hear this. And, you
Mm.
know, I began this walk as a 24-year-old, believing that I was going to change the world. And what I found is that I actually changed myself and
Mm.
learned a lot about people and about growing, and how people hold their lives on some
Yeah,
level. And when I was done with that walk, I realized I wanted to become a psychotherapist. That was um, one of the gifts of that, of doing that walk. But, you know, living outdoors for 9 months was a challenge. When it rained, I got
yeah,
wet. When it
yeah.
snowed, and it did snow a couple times, I got
Mm.
really cold. And when it, you know,
Mm.
but there was lots of beauty, and I really felt like I connected to nature in a super deep
Mm.
way.
Amazing. So let's go back to obviously, you know, your music and this album. You know, this album's coming out now. Well, it's actually released in June. And of course, that album is available on all music outlets, like we've mentioned. And um, Do you plan to do any concerts, maybe an intimate evening, playing all those tracks from the album? Because it's just such a beautiful album, isn't it? And I think, it would be a shame really not to, because it's just an incredible album. And it just has a real sense of peace.
Hmm, thank you. Yeah. Here's the thing. I only recently learned like two or three of the songs on the album because I wrote them as I played them. And so I've listened to them enough where now I've figured out a couple of them. And I, you know, I've thought about doing shows, but this might sound strange. It feels really vulnerable. Like it felt super vulnerable to release an album that had so much space in it.
Yeah.
Like in some ways, I feel like there's a lot of silence on that album, which isn't wrong. Doing a show that way would be really vulnerable for me.
Do you think?
Um, the way I
It's
look at it is,
understandable. Yeah.
yeah, I look at it this way, like the world is really noisy right now, and I'm not trying to compete with the noise. And
No.
in some ways, it feels like almost a radical act to allow silence during the noise and then put some sparse sounds
Mm.
and so um but I'm gonna hold that as an idea.
Yeah.
Whether or not like it
Just
would be really, yeah, that'd be
yeah.
really
I just think it can, like with a group of friends, because it's just it is such a personal album, and I understand that. I understand that. But the thought of having like an intimate evening with friends and family and loved ones, um, it's just a beautiful way of showcasing that what you've what you've created. This is
right.
one day, and you talk us through the day with music, which is lovely. It's a lovely concept. I love it. So thank you for talking to me, because I just think it's great to get the music out there, isn't it? And I think more people should share music like this, because it does heal people. And I'm a great believer that music is responsible for feelings and stuff, with people, and it can take you right back to a memory. It's such a powerful tool. And to hear an album like this, you can see that you've put your heart and soul into this album, and I'm sure everyone will absolutely love it, just like I do.
Thank you, Jenny.
So good luck with the album, and I wish you lots of luck in the future. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Nice to speak with you as well. I super appreciate it.
Lovely to speak to you. Bye for now.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.